Peter had always found solace in the serene whispers of the ocean, the rhythmic crash of the waves, and the gentle caress of the sea breeze. Scarp's Edge, a secluded beach known for its rugged cliffs and haunting beauty, had been his refuge from the chaos of daily life. This summer, however, the beach held a sinister air, one that Peter couldn't shake off. It began with the locals' warnings. The fishermen, who usually greeted Peter with friendly nods, now avoided his gaze, their faces etched with fear. Old Mr. Clark, who ran the bait shop, had pulled Peter aside one afternoon. "Stay away from the beach at night, lad," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. "There are things best left undisturbed." Peter had laughed it off. He was a rational man, not one to believe in ghost stories. But the unease grew as he noticed the once bustling beach turning into a deserted stretch, especially after dusk. Curiosity piqued, Peter decided to investigate. It was a moonless night when he ventured out. The beach was eerily silent, the usual symphony of nocturnal creatures absent. Peter's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing the jagged cliffs and the foam-tipped waves crashing against them. As he walked, he felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, as if he were being watched. A sound broke the silence, a low, mournful cry carried by the wind. Peter froze, his heart pounding. The cry grew louder, closer, and Peter's flashlight flickered and died. Panic surged through him as he fumbled for his phone, only to find it too had lost power. He felt the sand shift beneath his feet and turned to see a shadowy figure standing at the water's edge. The figure was shrouded in darkness, its features obscured, but Peter could feel its gaze piercing through him. The cry came again, more desperate, and the figure began to move towards him. Peter stumbled back, his mind racing. He had to get away, but his legs felt heavy, the air thick with an oppressive force. The figure reached out, its hand almost touching Peter's shoulder when a sudden gust of wind knocked him off balance. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him. When he looked up, the figure was gone. The beach was empty, the only sound the relentless crashing of the waves. Peter scrambled to his feet and ran, not stopping until he reached the safety of his car. The next day, Peter returned to the beach, determined to uncover the truth. He combed through local records, spoke to the few willing to talk, and pieced together a chilling history. Scarp's Edge had been the site of a shipwreck a century ago. The wreck had claimed dozens of lives, their bodies never recovered. Locals believed the spirits of the drowned sailors haunted the beach, seeking rest that eluded them. Peter wasn't one to believe in ghosts, but the experience had shaken him. He decided to spend one more night at the beach, this time better prepared. He equipped himself with extra batteries, a backup flashlight, and a small tape recorder. As night fell, he set up his equipment and waited. Hours passed with nothing but the sound of the waves. Peter began to think it had all been a figment of his imagination. Then, just as he was about to pack up, the mournful cry echoed across the beach again. His flashlight flickered but didn't die. He turned on the recorder, the red light blinking reassuringly. The shadowy figure appeared once more, moving slowly towards him. Peter held his ground, his heart racing but his resolve firm. The figure stopped a few feet away, its features clearer in the dim light. It was a man, his clothes tattered, eyes hollow. "Helpless," the figure whispered, the words barely audible over the wind. Peter took a deep breath. "How?" he asked, his voice trembling. The figure pointed towards the cliffs. "The wreckage, beneath the waves. Find us? Give us peace." Peter nodded, his mind racing. The figure faded into the darkness, leaving Peter alone with his thoughts. He knew what he had to do. The next day, he hired a diving team and searched the waters below the cliffs. They found the wreck, the skeletal remains of the sailors still trapped within the twisted metal. The discovery made headlines, the remains given a proper burial at last. The beach was no longer haunted, the spirits at rest. But for Peter, the memory of that night remained, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the haunting beauty of Scarp's Edge. As the years passed, Peter became something of a local legend himself, the man who had finally put the spirits of Scarp's Edge to rest. But the experience had left an indelible mark on him, one that he couldn't shake off. He found himself drawn back to the beach repeatedly, each visit a silent homage to the men who had found their final peace. One evening, several years after the discovery, Peter was walking along the now serene shore when he noticed something peculiar. The sand, usually smooth and undisturbed, was marred by a set of footprints leading from the water to the cliffs. They were fresh, the edges still sharp in the fading light. Peter's heart skipped a beat. The footprints were bare, too large to belong to a child, too small to be from the usual beachgoers. Curiosity and a sense of foreboding mingled within him as he followed the footprints. They led him to a small, previously unnoticed cave at the base of the cliffs. The entrance was narrow, partially obscured by a tangle of seaweed and driftwood. Peter hesitated, the memory of his past encounter with the supernatural weighing heavily on his mind. But the pull of the unknown was too strong. He squeezed through the entrance, his flashlight casting long shadows on the damp walls. The air inside was cool, tinged with the salty scent of the ocean. As he ventured deeper, the passage widened into a small chamber. At the far end, something glinted in the beam of his flashlight. Peter moved closer, his breath catching in his throat. It was a small chest, weathered and covered in barnacles. It looked ancient, like it had been lost for centuries. Peter knelt and carefully pried it open. Inside, he found a collection of personal items: a rusted locket, a pocket watch, and a bundle of letters, their ink faded but still legible. The letters were addressed to a woman named Eleanor, signed by a sailor named Thomas. They spoke of love, longing, and the promise of a return that never came. As Peter read the letters, he felt a chill pass through him. The ghostly figure's words echoed in his mind: "Give us peace." He realized that these personal effects had never been reunited with their rightful owner. The spirits had been searching for more than just a resting place. They sought closure for their unfinished lives. Determined to fulfill their final wish, Peter researched Eleanor and Thomas's history. He discovered that Eleanor had been a young woman from a nearby village, who had never married after Thomas's shipwreck. She had died alone, her heart broken. Peter located her grave, a modest stone in a small, overgrown cemetery. One foggy morning, Peter stood before Eleanor's grave, the chest in his hands. He spoke softly, recounting the story of the shipwreck and the love that had endured beyond death. As he placed the chest on her grave, a sense of calm washed over him. The air seemed to lighten, the fog lifting to reveal a clear blue sky. From that day on, the beach at Scarp's Edge was truly at peace. The eerie cries of the night were gone, replaced by the gentle lullaby of the waves. The locals returned, the fishermen casting their nets with renewed vigor, the children playing along the shore without fear. Peter, too, found peace. The nightmares that had plagued him since that fateful night ceased, replaced by dreams of calm seas and a love that had finally found its way home. He continued to visit Scarp's Edge, not out of obligation, but out of a deep, abiding respect for the spirits who had touched his life. In the end, Peter had become more than a man who solved a mystery. He became a guardian of the past, ensuring that the stories of those lost at sea would never be forgotten. The beach at Scarp's Edge remained a place of haunting beauty, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the enduring power of love and memory. Justin had always loved the beach. Growing up in a small coastal town, he spent countless hours on the sandy shores, watching the waves crash and feeling the salty breeze on his face. But the beach he was now driving towards was different. This beach had a reputation, and not a good one. He had heard the stories, tales of people disappearing, strange noises at night, and an eerie, oppressive feeling that hung in the air. But Justin was a skeptic. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses, so when he heard about the beach's secluded beauty and untouched sands, he couldn't resist the temptation to see it for himself. The drive took longer than expected. The narrow, winding road seemed to stretch on forever, and the dense forest on either side blocked out most of the sunlight. By the time Justin arrived, the sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows over the deserted shoreline. He parked his car and stepped out, taking a deep breath of the cool, salty air. The beach was as beautiful as he had imagined. The sand was soft and white, the water clear and blue. But there was something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, a sense of unease that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Determined to shake off the feeling, Justin set up his tent and gathered some firewood. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he lit a fire and sat down to enjoy the solitude. The crackling flames were comforting, and for a while, he was able to forget about the stories and the strange feeling that had settled over him. But as the night wore on, the sense of unease returned. The beach was eerily silent. There were no waves crashing, no seagulls calling, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was as if the entire world had gone still. Justin tried to ignore it, telling himself it was just his imagination. But then he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, carried on the breeze. He couldn't make out the words, but there was something about the tone that sent a chill down his spine. He stood up and looked around, but there was no one there. The beach was empty, the only light coming from his small fire. He told himself it was just the wind, but deep down, he knew it was something more. Determined not to let fear get the better of him, Justin decided to go for a walk. He grabbed his flashlight and started down the shoreline, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. The sand felt cold and damp under his feet, and the air grew colder with each step. As he walked, the whispering grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from all around him, echoing off the cliffs and the water. Justin's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to keep going. He had come here to prove that there was nothing to fear, and he wasn't about to turn back now. But then he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Up ahead, in the faint glow of his flashlight, he saw a figure standing at the water's edge. It was a woman, her long hair blowing in the breeze, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Justin called out to her, but she didn't respond. He took a few steps closer, his flashlight trained on her. She was wearing a white dress, and her skin was pale and translucent, almost glowing in the darkness. "Are you okay?" Justin asked, his voice trembling. The woman turned to look at him, and Justin's blood ran cold. Her eyes were empty, dark voids that seemed to suck in the light. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Justin took a step back, his mind racing. He wanted to run, but his legs felt like they were made of lead. The woman took a step towards him, her movements slow and deliberate. "Please," Justin whispered, his voice barely audible. "What do you want?" The woman stopped, her empty eyes locked onto his. For a moment, there was silence. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, she spoke. "Leave." The word echoed in Justin's mind, a command that left no room for argument. He turned and ran, his flashlight bouncing wildly as he sprinted back to his campsite. He didn't stop until he was inside his tent, the zipper pulled tight behind him. He sat there, trembling, his mind racing. He wanted to leave, to get in his car and drive as far away as possible. But something told him it wasn't that simple. He had seen something he wasn't meant to see, and now he was part of it. The whispering continued throughout the night, a constant, eerie murmur that kept Justin on edge. He didn't sleep, his eyes fixed on the tent flap, waiting for it to open. But it never did. When the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Justin wasted no time. He packed up his things and headed for his car, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't look back, didn't stop until he was miles away from that cursed beach. But even as he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The whispering followed him, a constant reminder of what he had seen. And deep down, he knew that no matter how far he went, he would never be able to escape the silent shore. Justin thought he left the horrors of the silent shore behind him, but the memories and the whispers haunted him. Every night, as soon as darkness fell, the whispers would begin again, faint at first but growing louder and more insistent with each passing hour. Sleep became a distant memory, his days blurring into a haze of fear and exhaustion. Desperate for answers, Justin began researching the beach's history. He combed through old newspapers, interviewed locals, and pored over forgotten records in the town library. The stories he found were chilling. A string of mysterious disappearances dating back decades, all centered around the same stretch of desolate coastline. One name kept appearing in his research: Elizabeth Harrow, a woman who had vanished under strange circumstances in the late 1960s. According to the records, Elizabeth had been a frequent visitor to the beach, drawn to its remote beauty. The last time she was seen alive, she had been standing at the water's edge, just as Justin had seen her. Determined to break the curse, Justin reached out to Elizabeth's surviving relatives. He found her niece, Clara, who reluctantly agreed to meet with him. Over coffee in a small, dimly lit diner, Clara shared the details of her aunt's disappearance. Aunt Elizabeth was troubled, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She always said she could hear voices at the beach, calling her name. Everyone thought she was losing her mind, but now, after hearing your story, I wonder if there was more to it. "Do you think the beach is cursed?" Justin asked, his hands trembling. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know what it is, but there's something evil about that place. Aunt Elizabeth wasn't the only one who disappeared. There were others, and they all heard the whispers before they vanished." Justin knew he had to go back. He couldn't live the rest of his life with the whispers haunting him, and he couldn't let more people fall victim to the beach's sinister pull. He packed his car with supplies and drove back to the silent shore, this time arriving in the early afternoon to give himself as much daylight as possible. The beach looked different in the harsh light of day, but the sense of unease remained. Justin set up his tent again, his heart pounding as he prepared for whatever the night would bring. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he lit a fire and waited, the whispers already starting to creep into his mind. This time, he didn't wait for them to come to him. Armed with a flashlight and a voice recorder, he walked along the shore, calling out to the spirits that haunted the beach. "Elizabeth Harrow, I know you're here," he said, his voice shaking. "I want to help you. Please, tell me what happened." For a moment, there was only silence. Then out of the darkness, a figure appeared. It was Elizabeth, just as he had seen her before, her white dress billowing in the breeze. "Why are you here?" Justin asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elizabeth's eyes, still dark voids, seemed to bore into his soul. "We are trapped," she said, her voice echoing in the still night. "We cannot leave until the truth is known." "The truth?" Justin repeated. "What truth?" Elizabeth raised a hand, pointing towards the cliffs that loomed over the beach. "There," she said, "beneath the rocks. Find it, and you will set us free." Justin didn't hesitate. He ran to the cliffs, his flashlight illuminating the jagged rocks. He searched frantically, his hand scraping against the rough stone. Finally, he found it, a small hidden cave, partially concealed by fallen rocks. Inside, the air was cold and damp. Justin's flashlight flickered as he stepped deeper into the darkness. There, at the back of the cave, he found a weathered journal, its pages yellowed with age. He opened it, his heart pounding as he read the entries written in Elizabeth's hand. The journal told a harrowing story. Elizabeth had discovered a group of smugglers operating on the beach, using the cave to hide their illicit goods. When she threatened to expose them, they had silenced her, burying her body in the cave and spreading rumors of her disappearance to cover their tracks. Justin felt a chill run down his spine as he read the final entry. The smugglers' leader had been a well-respected member of the community, someone no one would ever suspect. Elizabeth had known the risk she was taking, but she had been determined to do the right thing. Armed with this new information, Justin made his way back to town. He contacted the authorities, who were initially skeptical, but eventually agreed to investigate. The cave was excavated, and Elizabeth's remains were found, along with evidence of the smugglers' operations. The truth was finally revealed, and the beach was declared a crime scene. As the investigation unfolded, the whispers that had haunted Justin began to fade. Elizabeth and the others were finally at peace, their spirits freed from the silent shore. Justin never returned to the beach. The memories were too painful, and the whispers too haunting. But he knew that by uncovering the truth, he had not only saved himself, but also brought justice to those who had been wronged. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the trees, Justin would sometimes hear a faint, familiar voice thanking him for setting her free.